and then I can get us started with MCES.
I mean, you can just go ahead because,
okay. Yeah, as Cello said in the invite, we're using these monthly meetings to feature different utilities and their efforts doing assessments and improvements. And today we're pleased to be able to have 3 different MCES representatives. I'll introduce Lisa, and she can introduce the others and kick off the presentation. Lisa Thompson is the General Manager for Metropolitan Council Environmental Services. She's also the lead for the workforce and organizational culture team for WISE. So she's been involved with this effort for years now. and I'll just turn it over to Lisa to kick it off and get started. And I'd also say the plan is to hold your questions to the end, and you can put questions in chat, or you can raise your hand when the presentation is over, and then we can have some dialogue after the presentation. Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks, Scott. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to a session that I can say that you're probably glad you're not in Minnesota to do with us, because we got into the 20s last night. It was a hard frost. We weren't quite ready for that yet, or at least I wasn't. So Metropolitan Council Environmental Services, we are a large organization. I'll get into details on that in the next slide, but we're going to run through our preliminary planning that we've been engaged with, how we're using the WISE assessment tools, which is the part that joins all of us in a shared interest. And as is in 2B business process that we are in the midst of completing, and engagement by our organization that we've been doing that we think is a good model for us to replicate in the future, and our improvement plans. And with me to present that is Craig Edlund and Sam Paskey. They're both assistant general managers. Craig has the responsibility, a key one, for providing our wastewater services. And Sam has our overarching planning role for water supply and surface water. And I'm happy the two of them are part of this journey that we're taking as leaders, trying to transform our organization to be more outcome-based or systems-based, which is sounds pretty simple, but it's really rethinking absolutely everything that you have approached from a linear standpoint, and it's taxing. I'll just say that. You have to, it's not for the faint of heart. It's a bit like, if I can give an analogy that might not be perfect, but if you have your route that you take from the office or plant home every day, you don't really think about the map that you're following. And if in the summer there's road construction, it might mean that you should take a different route when you leave the office instead of waiting till you get to the detour closer to your home. And I can tell you that I had that experience this year, and there were multiple times when I headed home like the usual route and then went, oh, I should have gone a totally different way, because now I'm going to be in a bottleneck of traffic and it's going to take me longer to get home. But you just get in those habits and you stick with them and don't even realize that you forgot to change your habit. So with that, next slide.
Sorry.
There we go. So I've already introduced the presenters today. A little bit about us to remind folks that we basically treat about half of the state of Minnesota's wastewater. We're a regional utility. It was set up in the 70s. We have 9 facilities today. We serve 110 communities that basically make up our metropolitan region of the Twin Cities, or Minneapolis, St. Paul and their suburbs. Right now, in addition to this important work, we're really focusing in on a lot of things that pertain to a changing workforce and changing needs within our utility, so that we can make sure that we can continue to operate as successfully in the future as we have in the past. Next slide. So there's a lot of things on our slate of things to do. But we decided that starting with the CIP investment plan was the right thing for us to do. We knew that we had been talking about the need to improve this major planning system for some time, that we felt like there were inputs to the planning process that weren't being given a fair opportunity to really have influence on the plan. And so we needed to go back to the basics and think about how do we create the processes and relationships and the shared goals so that we could do a CIP investment plan for the future that will give us more resiliency and ability to adjust and to meet our new vision. So what is our new vision? Clean water for future generations. And compared to our old, it gives us a whole different North Star in terms of thinking about what plans we might undertake to serve that vision. And I think that's really important at this place and time, because we know the challenges of providing wastewater treatment in our smaller, less populated areas is growing, and we know that the impacts on our water supply are also growing. So we have to be more than what we've been traditionally as a wastewater treatment facility. Next slide. So that reworking of our vision also caused us to think about what's the mission that we need to meet in order to, or provide in order to achieve the vision of clean water for future generations. And we decided that we really have three basic critical systems for providing that capacity. And one of them is the partnering system. One is planning, and the other is the providing of services. So if I think about that in the context of our history, we were heavily focused on the providing and doing a really awesome job there. But now this partnering and planning is going to give us, I think, a greater attention and focus in our work towards the vision of clean water for future generations. So those are our basic parts of our organization, along with a really important one that you see at the bottom, which is our learning system. And that's what gives us the feedback and tells us how well we're doing and what adjustments we might need to make to those three capacity systems as we provide our mission. Next slide. And this is a slide you've probably seen before. You can go ahead and advance. Greatest invention of all time. It's people working together towards a common goal. Basically, do they have a shared goal? Do they understand it? Next slide. We know from research that the more diverse teams have the highest performance potential because they have the most understanding of the entire picture. And when you make a decision, you want to understand all aspects. Next, advance. So the greatest invention actually isn't just a group of people. It's a group of people that have the social coordination of having the same goal, having the same understanding of that goal, and being committed to it. Next slide. So a quick and easy or stickier way to think about that is people do the work the way they see it. So if they don't see the goal the same, they're not going to be doing work that's in orchestration of alignment. They will be potentially thwarting each other's efforts, not intentionally, but that could be the effect of that. Next slide. Should be. I'll hand it off now to Sam Paskey.
Thanks, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. This is pretty exciting, actually. We've been involved, our organization, since the beginning, although I think there was plenty of work happening before the funding appeared and the actual work. So I want to just say thank you to Cello and many others who've been involved and persistent and had that shared vision, because we're really impressed with this methodology and we're getting value out of it. And Craig and I are going to provide a little more detail on that. So yeah, we couldn't be more excited to be sharing this with you today. You can hear it in my voice, right? Lisa, thank you. So on the screen is the methodology. We're using it right now to go through a process to evaluate how we pull together a capital investment plan. So just to be clear on what that means, we're not talking specifically when we're working through this process internally right now about how do you define a capital project? Is it the right project? What is it supposed to do and why? This is one step past that. We are assuming we have a bucket of good projects. The question we're looking at is how do we assemble those good projects, given limited resources, into the best set of investments for our mission and for the region we serve. And that's a big topic. It involves, frankly, everybody in the organization. And as Lisa said, getting that alignment so that we're all sharing the same idea of what success looks like is challenging work. It always will be. And we can figure out, at the end, what does success look like individually fairly easily. Our water supply planning unit is concerned about aquifers and water needs into the future. That's never an easy challenge, as we know, especially out west. But they have a fairly defined lane, and our water resources folks are looking at contaminants of emerging concern in water bodies and water quality. And our wastewater folks are thinking about public health and capacity and growth. But how do you add all those things together when you only have limited money to make the best bet on the future for the region with the systems that we pour concrete and invest in infrastructure? So this process here, we're about 2/3 of the way through it right now. I think the innovative thing about it is that it's simple. We're finding it very straightforward to apply. And I'm told we're the first to apply the whole tool. We also picked an easy process, like I was saying with the CIP. Honestly, if you're going to use a tool that you trust and you think this is robust enough to really help, throw your hardest problem at it. And we did. So that's something that we're actually finding, that this tool is capable of helping us with some really significant high impact decisions that we need to make internally. It has a way to look at the technology you use in your organization, and as a way to look at the processes and how processes help bring people together to evaluate and make decisions. And then it also helps you look at the people themselves. You see that yellow box is the workforce. The one we haven't gotten to yet is the change management maturity. We're meeting this week with our groups to talk about where we want to go, the 2B, if you will. Cello, you can move to the next slide. This is the process we're using to work through that chart from the slide before. As kind of Lisa used a metaphor years ago that resonated with me talking about our organization. It was the one of the elephant and the blind men, where there's an elephant. It's an elephant. It's only an elephant, but there are a bunch of blind men standing there in the story, and they're each touching the elephant, and one thinks he's touching a tree, and another thinks he's touching a rope, and another thinks he's touching, I think, a wall. I don't recall it all. And that's kind of what we're getting in an organization. And the challenge is to bring those perspectives together. And that's what the words on the left mean. We're trying to help people understand what they do and how it relates to what everyone else does. And so they ultimately share in their heads a common concept or mental model of how this all works. We all get our work better, but the challenge of leaders is to help us understand the overall work and how that work can best be done for the best shared outcome. We started in August, and we're going to have something that we can move forward with this month. Next slide. Going through the process, we came up with some things we would like to improve, kind of a upfront needs assessment done at a higher level, just to say where do we think we need to have the result have impact. And then we cascaded that into how would you know you're doing better? What are the parts of that? That's the right column. The things we're going after is, I kind of mentioned that before, is how do you effectively prioritize what you're going to spend money on? What data do you need? can you even execute that if you did? Do you have the resources, financial, but actually we're finding that the human resources, the engineers, the technology people, to be able to carry out that plan is as much of a challenge as the financing. A bunch of external things we're worried about, like affordability, the kinds of services we provide, like can we set ourselves up to do more water reuse and reclamation of resources in the future? And how do we position ourselves to do that? Meeting customer and environmental goals. How do we engage externally so we really understand what our region needs? And we have the buy-in to deliver that. And then even down to the nuts and bolts of how well is our investment planning process documented? Are we sustainable through staff transitions and things like that? So it's a pretty broad range of success factors that we're looking for. You can jump to the next slide, Cello. This is the chartering process. So right up front, it's aligning the leadership team that's sponsoring this work. On the left, we've defined the purpose of it. The rapid process, for those of you who don't know it, is a lot like RACI, but it's a little more detailed. And honestly, we really like it. It's been a very effective way to figure out how do you engage people in your organization when maybe the roles or responsibilities of a particular set of decisions isn't so clear. We've been starting with that often, and that gives us a good way to get started. Here, the rationale is laid out where we're trying to help the CIP development process be more inclusive inside our organization across business groups, but also vertically so that even the people on the shop floor have a strong connection to what we decide to build in the future. On the right, again, there's some of those outcomes we're looking for, and it's in a sense projectized. We've got some resource budget milestones. All those things are part of the execution plan of this 2 or 3 month project that we're undergoing, which of course will set us up for a lot more work to come because it is identifying things we're going to do. Next slide, please, Cello. As we walked through the tool set, that goes back to that flow diagram you saw earlier. It's pretty cool, honestly. Yep, that's the right one, thanks. It steps you through, the tools stepped us through, starting with the objectives, the business process goals on the left. Then we talk about, well, how do you know you're effective at that? So that's the metrics or the KPIs. And then it walks you further through, how do you know if that's even a good way to measure it? Like, can you do that now? And is it really important to be able to do it? So in a sense, we're working up a gap analysis of what is our ability to do it the way we want to right now. And this was helpful early on just to say that, yeah, we have some gaps that we need to close, and we're missing some pieces that are fairly important in even being able to close those gaps. It helped us understand the current state and where the opportunities might be. Next slide, please, Cello. And again, getting back to the process, we get what we do, as Lisa said. The way you see the work is the way you do the work, but the way you do the work is the process, and the process is going to either set us up for success or set us up to not succeed. And that's one of the strengths of this methodology, is it is very process oriented. And I think you do have to get down to that level of, what are you actually doing in this business process? Who does it? What are they expecting from others? Do they have what they need? And if we don't get down to that level, we're really just hoping things will work better. And as leaders, helping position our people to be successful, I think requires digging into, how is the work actually happening? Is everything set up so people can work together effectively? This gets into the documentation of that process, but that's pretty enlightening, because if it's not documented, then it's not really a standard process that we can consistently follow. Next slide. From there, we talk about if the process needs data, what data does it need? Where's that stored? Who owns that? That's a very interesting discussion. Rarely, although there are a couple examples, do we see only one group owns that data. Usually it's more complicated than that. And that opens up further opportunities for us to do better at having the right data that means the right things to the people who need it. And then my last slide, the next one, is what we've learned so far going through that technology and business process review up to the point now where we're talking about, well, what do we want to tackle based on what we've learned? And Craig's going to handle that. But we've found that these tools are, I'd say, easy. We were saying not difficult, but I think it was pretty straightforward and easy to apply. We know our organization fairly well, and we weren't looking to dig way down into the weeds. And this tool helped us stay at the right level to tee up the opportunities that we knew we had, and we just had to see those a little more clearly and how they relate to each other. The way the process requires people from across the organization to be part of it, I think is a key part of the success, both to going through it, but also getting what we want out the other end of it, and then even implementing beyond. If we don't have that involvement, I don't know that we'd be successful. And we really like how the process supports that. It also helps people see where they fit into the overall process so that they can make sure that they're not just helping their part be successful, but they're helping their peers be successful. And that's that swim lane component. The technology side is really helpful too, but the focus on the process itself, which the technology enables, I think is a key strength of what we're learning here. And with that, I'll hand it off to Craig.
Thank you, Sam. And Cello, you can go to the next slide. So Sam talked a bit about the business processes and the technology and how we looked at that through the assessment. There's also another big piece, which everybody has, people. So part of the overall assessment tools was the workforce and organizational culture assessment. And being that this was our first time utilizing the WISE methodology, we did want to try using this assessment tool as far as the understanding our workforce and culture, even at this level. So we were applying that at a very small subset of our organization, which is our stakeholder input group that we have working through the assessment. And so for those of you who are familiar with WISE and may have been working on this particular assessment tool, there are some specific categories that we did walk through, which are, organizational strategy and performance, our values, looking at responsibility and accountability, how do we do reward and recognition, how good our communications and communications loops are, how well our employees are engaged, and also around the teamwork and collaboration, which really tied into how we utilize this assessment and how we are moving forward with looking at our processes. So we did want to utilize, again, this part of the tool or the tool set with our group, even though it is kind of a targeted smaller subset of our organization. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you, Jill. So one of the things that we did we did conduct Tier 1 and Tier 2 questions of the survey, both with our stakeholder input group and our steering team. And some of the lessons learned that we did get out of this is we did understand that some of the feedback that we got from our stakeholder input group is they were some very good questions with the survey. We utilized Mentimeter, which is a tool that we utilize to get scoring and feedback. It's a kind of a really good real-time feedback software to use. some of that feedback was it is very good to do the survey in a workshop setting. So that way you do have the room full of folks who are doing the Mentimeter. It's not just an email survey. And some of the things that we did find out is there was some very high variability in our distribution with our scores based upon that we had a smaller group. So some of those scores were either very on the low end or the high end. So you need to kind of understand that the group that you're doing this with, we did have I think one of our main takeaways was the group that we were having participate in this was a bit small. So we only had about 25 folks that were actually utilizing this in this particular process. And trying to use demographics, which you could not do with that small of a group or that subset, and still retain confidentiality as far as, we could, with a smaller group, it's very easy to figure out who might be answering in a specific way. So some of those takeaways is I think we felt the tool was very good, but we were looking at utilizing that more at an organizational wide or maybe a larger subset of our organization, which would really then get us a better benefit due to just the demographics. And an additional one that we did understand is I think that the tier 2 questions, rather than starting our workshops with doing the assessment, we're looking at revisiting this and doing this maybe later in the process so that we are looking at getting some better information coming back out of it. But it was our first time utilizing the tool, and we had a lot of good feedback from our stakeholder group on utilizing the tool. We're just needing to figure out exactly where to apply it and when. Next slide. So coming out of our workshops, we did get to our as-is, which was very interesting because as we got into our as-is, we did identify that our current process, if you can see, is really focused around one main kind of a silo area that was doing the majority of our process with a little bit of input from our finance group. Next slide. So as we were going through that as is, we did identify, or the stakeholder input group in their workshop did identify specific process improvements that they wanted to see to get incorporated into the 2B process. And some of those improvements were to incorporate our vision, our planning, and our resource partners, a lot more input with One Water, especially around looking at triple bottom line, making sure that we are also taking a look at and bringing in our levels of service and equity into that process. We were adding a lot more activities, roles, and participants. So basically expanding out from that single silo that was actually working that process and gaining a lot more collaboration and input from other groups. Adding some metrics so we actually can see how well the process is working. Making sure that we had top management engagement and decision-making within that process. Understanding that we have a more realistic resourcing and accomplishment estimates. So we actually get a lot closer to, if we say we're going to spend this much capital, that we actually get to spending that much capital. Definitely adding documentation to how the process works. And then looking at making sure that this is an annual process that is leveraging work that is being done throughout the year, and that we are updating cost estimates and doing our BCEs throughout the year, not just at single steps during the process. So on to the, go ahead, switch. So as we were working towards our 2B, for the ease of use within this workshop, we did come to, and basically to maintain some focus for that group, we did take the to-be process out of, and it did kind of a modified BPMN format. And starting off with an overview, kind of a value chain of our major process steps. Switch to the next slide. And then walking through those particular process step areas with the group. So we actually do have a meeting, but we have a workshop planned for tomorrow where we will be walking through this 2B with our stakeholder input group and getting feedback on how we looking for this 2B. And we have basically are showing how that as is actually folded into this new 2B, and then all the inputs and improvements that were identified from the group and showing them how that is now working within this. And again, this is kind of a modified version of the BPMN format, mainly just to make it on a simplified, it's easier to work through in the workshop with the group. So this is basically our planning context. And as you can see that there's many more swim lanes or a lot more collaboration across the division. Go ahead and switch. The second portion of that was the preparing information for getting ready to do our capital project, or our ACP and our CIP, which is our active and our CIP that does get published and sent to our council. Go ahead, next slide. The analysis and prioritization and how we look at our projects. And like Sam said, not assuming that we are looking at how projects are created, but starting with a bucket of projects that we are assuming are already, ready for the CIP, but bringing those through an analysis and prioritization process to also understand, but again, also bringing a lot more of the voices to the table. Next slide. We're just kind of walking through each of the process areas here. So then we also have additional with the decision-making side of that 2B. And again, getting more feedback, getting a lot more representation from across the division. Next slide. And of course, the final preparations and approvals. So one major takeaway that we wanted to note is that we were moving away from a single functional silo that really was performing this process to a more inclusive and collaborative approach, utilizing stakeholders from across the division and our external to the organization. Next slide. And as Sam also kind of said, there were some major process improvements that were identified that were not part of the CIP, but very much a critical success factors for making sure that the CIP process that we were working on would be able to actually be implemented and updated. And some of those process improvements in different areas are looking at having a very good project justification and prioritization tools and understanding and process, business case evaluations, shoring up our BCE process and how we do that, and making sure that we are looking at each of these projects and how do we make sure that they are the right projects to do at the right time. Another major improvement area was ensuring participation and engagement. And how do we reach out and making sure that we're taking and talking to stakeholders and others, getting the buy-in and support for the CIP, and also making sure that we have that for our external partners as well, not just our internal. Financial management and funding. is another major improvement area, looking at how we are working on our rate stabilization, our credit rating, our performance for our financial policies, looking at industry best practices, and integration of asset management principles and our ongoing governance framework for how do we support the CIP investment plan moving forward. Another improvement area is our asset management and facility team integration. So currently at MCES, at each of our 9 plants, we have facility teams that are working on strategic level, looking at asset management plans, looking at how we do operational planning, but utilizing those facility teams as more input into our CIP process. And our customer, environmental, and regulation, more integration of our external partners with regional policies and priorities, effective engagement of our external customers, our regional, our customers, our organizational and regulatory partners. So we do have making sure that we are reaching out to our external regulatory agencies, watersheds, our external partners are in our communities, our community customers as well, but making sure that they are part of our ES planning systems and our processes. And again, these are all initiatives that we identified as needing to be worked on in conjunction with our CIP process in order to make sure that that has a, they're critical success factors. If we don't work on these things and have some additional projects coming out of this, that the CIP may not be as effective as we are moving forward. So each one of these areas, when we looked at the CIP as a place to start applying the WISE tools, each of these areas will also be getting the WISE tools applied to them with chartered teams. Next slide. So as we progress through this initiative and we're utilizing the WISE methodology, we are moving from, and again, here is our as is in a BPMN format, very busy, but still single siloed, really looking at just one swim lane that was doing all the work. And that's moving to, next slide. So this is the BPMN for our overall process. That is our 2B. And again, now looking at this, if you have a group of people who are not used to looking at this kind of a diagram, it can be a little bit much to be looking at, which is why we move to a simplified or modified version, just to have that focus when we get into the stakeholder input group so that we can focus on each of our areas of the process. So breaking that down by here's our planning, here's how we prepare, here's how we do analysis, here's where we do decision making, and then that final preparation and approvals through the council. By breaking it down into those areas into that simplified version really does help focus our stakeholder group to each area. And as you can see, it's a lot more inclusive than our as is. Go ahead, that's okay. So as we are finalizing our process and finalizing tomorrow with our 2B at our stakeholder workshop, we also will be working on implementation plans. So understanding that we have a 2B, we get some agreement and we look at what changes need to be made to implement this. But as always, what is the most hard part about doing any change initiative? It's the actual implementation and execution. So when we are also with this stakeholder group, understanding that we do need to, and I think this is probably one of the most important pieces of the entire process and of the WISE method, is the readiness assessment. Too often we go off, we have wonderful discussions, we have all kinds of really good plans, but we don't really understand whether or not we're actually ready to do this. So to me, this was probably the most important step that we have to do. And so we will be sitting down with our stakeholder group and the steering team and walking through the readiness assessment to make sure that we have everything in place, that we are ready to go, and that we have the best, that we have we're ready to be successful. I guess is the best way to put that. So making sure that we are actually ready to implement. And of course, that sets us up into that plan, do, check, act loop. So thank you for your time today. Any questions?
Yeah, this is an opportunity for people to raise your hand or to add, put a question in chat if you want to do it that way. So I expect some hands to go up, but maybe I would just start out, since I don't see any yet, but I know I'll be seeing some, just asking, what do you think? Each of the three of you could quickly comment on this, but what do you think the biggest challenges were over the last several months in implementing, the WISE tools and this process?
I could just quick jump in. Good question, Scott. And thanks for all the folks here listening, and we hope you have questions too. I think the biggest one is, how do you get started when you have one group in the organization that's basically been upholding a process the best they can? And we want to honor that. But we do need to step back and think about what is the best way to do this for our mission and all the other things we can bring to the discussion to enrich it internally and externally. And that's where the methodology really gives us hope and daylight in stepping into that conversation. Honestly, that's the hardest part. And it doesn't make it easy. So I think that chartering and starting up part is where we've been living right now, and trying to get the right conversation to happen in the room. And it's been pretty effective at that. I think facilitation is a big part of that success too.
I would jump in with, I think, kind of two-part here is anytime we do look at doing change, especially in an organization where you've been successful, when how you are doing your day-to-day operation does work, and understanding that the need for change, or there's a desire for change. So that second piece of that is kind of taking a look and overcoming the culture of, we have a group that's doing it, it has been successful, why do we need to change? And just getting us to a point where we have that understanding with, like Sam said, with a group that has already been doing it and very successfully, to understanding that as an organization that we need more voices and that we needed to make this change. So I think, and just about any process that we look at, we will be having that conversation around the why.
Lisa, did you have, you're on mute, but did you have any comments on any major challenges?
Well, there definitely was that theme of ensuring that staff that have been doing good work under our old mindset of how we thought about doing our work, that they don't feel like we're being critical of that, that it's more about we're going to live our vision in different ways, because we do have a vision that's different from the past. So to ask people to basically slow down and be curious as we talk about exploring different ways of doing things. So don't go into autopilot and just do things the same old way. Slow down and think about what would be different about how I'm going to do this, given the other changes we've been embarking on and talking about. So it's really asking people to think about their relationship to the work and the outcome, and not their relationship to whoever they report to in the organization, because that's what's framed everybody's thinking. What is my boss going to be happy with me about? Well, your boss may not have the full outcome ownership. So then they're going to carve their piece out. Well, sometimes that sub-optimizes the outcome of the system with not intentionally, but that's what does happen when we break things into pieces, and they're not always held together in the thinking about what's the best thing to do. That's a lot harder than it sounds. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Scott, there are some raised hands. I don't know if you see.
Yeah, I do.
Invite polling. Okay, good.
Yeah, so let's just take these in order. Mark Poling, you want to go first, and then Ashley.
Sure. Thanks. Great presentation. And I apologize, I was a few minutes late, but I think I caught a fair amount of it. This is to me, it's a fascinating result, because oftentimes when we're looking at processes, our mindset ahead of time is like, well, we're trying to streamline, right? We're trying to make this faster. And what you discovered by going through your process, and I think this is a case where you're going to have better results on the end of this process, and that is that you needed more inclusion. So at what point did you come to that, and how have you managed? And I think, Lisa, you already talked about it. And then, the tricky part is the people that were doing the process now, they're sort of the guardians. How you convince them that, no, this is really a good thing. We need to slow this down a little bit and get some more inclusion.
So you don't have to speak all at once, and you're on mute, but you want to respond to Mark?
I could take the last part of that. I think the process that we've used and the discussions we've had have helped people see that there's opportunities to do better. And the better comes about with, when we talked about our rapid model, which we've started to use, which if you want to be a more inclusive and collaborative organization, it's a really helpful tool, because it clarifies what that person's connection is to the decision that's going to be made, right? And so there's a lot more confidence that I'm here with a relationship to this decision that I totally understand. And I'm being given the opportunity to influence that decision, or have input, or need to have the decision be something I agree with. So those roles get really clear. I think it empowers people, and it leads to more engagement, because they aren't just waiting for what their boss is going to tell them is okay for them to go do or participate in. It's set up as a system across ES instead of coming at it through a silo.
Great, thank you.
I'm complete.
Yeah, Sam or Craig, do you want to comment, or should we move on?
I'll actually answer for Craig, so you get both of us, because he said it. We were talking earlier, and he said you really can't solve one problem. In that, if you try to do that, and we all know things in our organizations that could be better, but if we go at it that way, we actually are solving a symptom most often, and you can't solve a symptom. There's an underlying thing to get at, and that underlying thing is there because of the way we're all thinking about it. And if you need to make a quick patch of an issue or something, that's fine. We all have to do that. But to really make progress, you have to take that bigger view. And I would say normally slow down, but honestly, this doesn't feel like slowing down to us. We're going through it pretty quickly relative to the enormity of what we're talking about. I mean, the whole capital investment plan process it defines our existence 50, 100 years out, and probably controls 90+% of our spend, even though our capital program's roughly about half when you think of debt service, but it defines what operationally we will be spending into the future. What a high impact process. The implementation work, though, which we haven't started yet, is where it's going to get real.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ashley, you got a question?
Hi. Maybe you've answered this already, but for each of you, what was the most surprising thing that you had some preconceived notions and that maybe there was a little surprise or something that was quite impactful?
I know that one. I'll start with one. When you bring it to the people, that's when, like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth or something like that. So we create the project plan. We're going to create the stakeholder group. We're going to sit in front of them and engage them and hopefully enlist them in this work. The group that really owns the process right now said, actually, we would like to make the first process map ourselves instead of following the WISE methodology. And so we had to adapt on the fly and say, well, that's a good response. You want to engage. We might be seeing it from one group's perspective when that happens, which is okay. We want to hear that. But we actually need to see the process through everybody's eyes. So we were getting what we were asking for, but not in quite the way we anticipated. So it did require some fluidity on our part.
Yeah.
Uh,
Good.
Go ahead,
Maria
Lisa.
Luisa.
Well, there's an expression that
Oh.
being wrong feels just like being right until you know you're wrong. So for those folks that have been doing it the way it's been done and providing, a good plan from certain measures anyway, what was eye-opening was how their shifting and thinking evolved as we had this involved process and they heard other voices. Then it became, I think, more about it's not broken, but it could be better. So better together is a theme we've also been building off of it, that we know that we haven't done things together that would help us be better. So let's set up the processes to allow that.
And I was going to say a surprising thing for me, and Lisa touched on it with the better together, is we haven't actually talked about the group that we have as our stakeholder group and what diversity that we have from across the division. And it really did pull people in from all areas, both our support services, our operations managers, maintenance, planning. So basically all areas of the organization or our division are representative in this stakeholder group. And I thought that was, to me, the lack of knowledge and understanding of what this process even was as we started in for all these different areas. And then they started understanding just how much it impacted them. And I think that was, to me, was great to watch that interaction happening, that aha moments as people were going, oh, this really is a big deal for me and impacts me. And now I have the ability to have a say in it. So the utilizing the methodology, utilizing how we are approaching this, it was just very good to watch the connections being made. And I wasn't sure how well that was going to go, and it actually has gone very well and is starting to set up other connections outside of this process.
Thanks. Maria Luisa was having trouble with her sound, but she had a question, a tough one actually, is how are you going to quantify, monetize, or identify benefits associated with the improvements that you're making and this process? We had to have a tough question.
We haven't identified all the metrics we'll use, but we have a list of possibilities. When we did our mission and vision work, we defined the 3 capacity systems that we have, and planning is one of them. And so in the process of doing that, we have a pretty long list of metrics that we could use to see whether our planning system as a whole was accomplishing the best that it could. So the CIP would be a subsystem of our overall planning. So we'll work that into our 4th major function or part of the organization, which is our learning system. What are we learning that informs how we want to adjust our performance of our capacity systems?
Yeah, that's good. Jennifer, we're getting a lot of questions from Metro Vancouver today.
We're very curious. Yes.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah.
Thank you for the
Jennifer, yeah.
presentation. Yeah, that's great. I'm just wondering what, so you're still, you haven't gotten to the implementation stage. You're still kind of in like the definition phase. Is that my understanding? And so what was your schedule, your anticipated schedule of going through this process versus what, what it has actually been for you? Like, was it what your schedule that you anticipated? Has it worked out to be roughly what it is? And how long has it taken to get to this point?
Go ahead,
Sam?
Craig. Yeah.
Sam, or are you just pointing at me? Okay, I'll take this because quite frankly, Jennifer, the way that we started the schedule was, yes, okay, we're looking at, we want to do something. We know we want to do something. We know that these things do take time. This is the first time that we're using this methodology. So we're kind of, as far as schedule, winging it with the idea that we have a charter, we have defined milestones, but also this is a group that is representative of across the division. So trying to put these workshops together, of course, you end up with, constraints around getting people together, but you still want to make sure that you have that representation being there. I think that has been a constraint for us. So moving forward, this is a big deal for us. So even looking at a 3 to 4 month implementation, because the constraint that we do have is that we have an annual process for developing and putting out the CIP, and we want to have this process in place for our next time that we're doing the CIP. So that kind of gives us that milestone of you have to be done by X. When we go through our workshop tomorrow, we will be walking through, here's our plan, or here's the to be, getting some of that feedback, but also getting into an implementation plan, which is really going to set our schedule hard. But we do know there's that point in time that we have to be done.
Did you have to, that's great, thank you. Yeah, did you have to hire extra or like additional resources to help with this plan, or have you been able to just do it with the resources you have?
Well, knowing that we don't have a lot of resources and everybody is trying to do more with less,
Yes.
or is it more with, yeah, it's less with, not less with less. It's always more with less.
Yes.
We did bring in consultants to help
okay.
run and facilitate the workshops,
Okay. Okay.
which is very helpful for us because with just the amount of things that we have going on, it's helpful to get. And then, of course, as we move along, we do want to look at training up internal resources to be able to use the method.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And on the question on how long it took, I think Sam said they started in August, and this is October. So just in a few months, they were able to get through this, and that's more or less what they planned. So anyway.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think we've kind of run out of time. The hour is used up. So Cello, I think that we want to thank the presenters and thank all the attendees for joining us today. And we look forward to other sessions like this from other utilities so they can share as well.